And before Erry takes the baton, I'd like to give a brief introduction. Erry Prasetyo is currently the second secretary of the Indonesian Permanent Mission in Geneva on intellectual property issues. Previously, he was in charge of policy analysis on UN specialized agencies on trade, economic development, and international finance at the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He holds a degree specializing in international trade and finance from Columbia University. Erry.
Thank you, Thiru, and thank you, Kawe, for introducing me. Well, first of all, I have to thank KAI, of course, and everyone, including the panelists, the keynote speakers, and the participants for the excellent discussion that really helps me understand better the issue on the WIPO Broadcasting Treaty. And of course, just like Kawe, as a member of a permanent mission in Geneva, I have to do a lot of disclaimer. First of all, this won't be, whatever I'm going to say, it's not in the position of the government of Indonesia. It's just a mere reflection, but I can tell you that whatever I'm going to say can be a safe assumptions of what Indonesia might think with regard to the broadcasting treaty. So that will be the first disclaimer. Now the disclaimer would be, as Thiru has mentioned, there is nothing in my very short bio that I'm a lawyer or I'm a legal expert on IP. I'm not a legal expert, I'm not an IP expert, I'm more of an economist, but then I have to deal with this issue in Geneva. So the very first time I actually heard about broadcasting treaty was 2.5 years ago on my first CCR. So again, and I think I will not try to repeat all the technicalities that have been discussed on all the panels, and including all that Kawe, Viviana, and Ambassador Acosta has already mentioned. But I will just be focusing on try to do reflections on, well, I'm not saying that I can do the reflections, but I'm trying to do a personal closing reflections on the 1.5 discussions that we're having. So of course I will, again, please forgive me if I oversimplify some terms, because I'm not an expert in this field, but I will just, I will oversimplify some terms or some legal terms with regard to broadcasting treaty. And first of all, it will be the way I understand it, the way my simple mind understand it, that we're talking about the neighboring rights, and the neighboring rights or related rights. With the rationale of having to grant a neighboring right is because you cannot grant a copyright over these rights because there is no such word are created that can be protected by copyright. And I think Creative Commons has already mentioned that if it actually there is some creative work or such effort that make it protectable by copyright, you don't even need this treaty to enforce it. So we're talking about the neighboring rights. That's the rationale that we're giving about. And I can understand where broadcasters are coming from. When WIPO updated neighboring rights for the performers and phonogram producers, we still left out with the broadcasters with no update. So we should do something about it. So, but this is everyone is in agreement, because as you can see, WIPO itself in 2007 has already agreed that we agree that there is a need to update this neighboring rights for the broadcasters, and we agree, at least on the 2007 mandate, the last mandate that we have, is that we agree that it is based on the traditional, the understanding of broadcasting in a traditional sense. Which I can tell you, if you take a look at even Indonesian latest law on copyright, which is amended in 2014, the way we define it is still in traditional sense. The non-traditional sense, or if you put wire, it won't even fall under the category of broadcasting. It falls under the category of communication to the public, which has different set of rights and other thing in Indonesian copyright law. So that's where we left off. And then I heard that Viviana, Ambassador Acosta, and maybe to some extent Kawe as well mentioned about the need for evidence-based, and then in the panel as well, the need to make the case. Why do we need this treaty? So based on that, I will just want to introduce new terms as in the perspective of government. That it's not confusion, but it's more of an uneasiness. I think it's very natural for anything that is human, that if you don't really know what you're dealing with, you will feel uneasy, and the safest way to deal with it is not to do anything about it. So I can try to clarify that there is a lot of argument that there is lack of political will, or there is no interest, or the experts that are negotiating the treaty do not understand the substance or the technicality of the treaty. Well, it might be part of the problem, but it's not the main problem on why when we agreed to amend it, it takes so long to agree. It's those things might be part of the problem, but it's not the main problem. The main problem is this confusion that creates uneasiness. And we have to understand again where whoever is coming from, be it a technical person that coming from a telecommunication ministry of a country, or from the IP office, or even a diplomat in Geneva, when you have to sit there in an informal room in WIPO and doing a text negotiation on the consolidated draft text, you will feel there is a lot of questions that is unanswered, and if you don't really know the real answer, you cannot do anything about it. So it's not about the lack of political will or the lack of understanding. It's about there are two different spectrums that say something. The broadcaster says that we need this right. Yes, for signal piracy we agree, but for unfair competition we're not really sure, and we don't. This question has not been settled yet, even by the broadcasters. And from the other side as well, well, I'm not saying that I don't believe in whatever the panels are saying, but from the other side as well, we talk about access to culture, access to information. But is this really true, all these claims? Government also not clear yet. Just really giving more protection or even offer protection to our broadcasters, which also the stakeholders of every government, will actually really threaten this much, the access to culture or the legitimate general public interest. It is not clear yet as well. So if both sides are cannot settle this uneasiness in dealing with the questions, then it's not about lacking of political will. It's about we don't want to have anything to do with something that is not really clear, because you don't want to take that risk. So both sides have to really come up. What is really the matter here? What do you want? Is it just signal piracy or also with unfair competition? If it's with unfair competition, from which competitors? Because these competitors are also stakeholders of every government. I'm not even talking about the public. We have to answer to the public, we have to answer to other stakeholders, and we have to answer to the we have to answer to the broadcasters. So government has to take care of this. Government are not just about the broadcaster, or I can say this, like, for example, if you're on the other side of WIPO thing, governments are not just pharmaceutical industries. So as government, we have to make sure that everything, we have to weigh in, what are the costs? We are not against giving more rights or even offer protection to our broadcasters if we understand clearly what are the costs to our other stakeholders in our country. But if this is not being settled, then it will be hard for us to even engage more. So all we have to do, we take a lot of good notes and we send it to Capital and just say this is all the arguments from all the different sides. And this is what we're doing. So if I can copy the way Kawe will try to conclude, so what will be the next step? What kind of broadcasting treaty that we might have? So if the push to really we want this treaty, even though there are a lot of questions that are not settled yet, a lot of uneasiness still there in the people that are actually discussing the treaty, then we have to be able to accept that some countries would want a very broad safeguards, exceptions and limitations, because we're not clear on what we are dealing with. We want to make sure that this is clear first. So we want to have broad safeguard for general public interest that we can invoke for any kind of thing that we can even think of right now. We would even want, we talk about the exception and limitations, so all of those things should be there, just to make sure that everything that we can't think of right now because we don't have the perfect information to make decision should be there to safeguard. Otherwise, then we cannot sign to anything that just, we don't know what will be the real impact. The real impact will be. So in concluding, I will just say that why the negotiation takes so long, it's not because governments are lacking political will. It's not because we're politicizing this process. I heard that people are still, the discussion is not about substantive, it's not about technicalities, it's more about politics. But you have to agree that any treaty negotiation is public policy exercise. Any treaty negotiation is not making a technical paper for a very technical, particular scientific journal. You don't have to think about other factor. But treaty negotiation is a public policy exercise. And government are answerable not to just the broadcasters. We are answerable to a lot of stakeholders. So we really want to know what are really happening. And I have to emphasize, we are not against, there is no objection to give more benefits to our broadcasters. Of course, Indonesia would want to make sure that Indonesian broadcasters will have a very good environment for them to strive and to live and to reap benefits of a system. But then, to give this, what will be the cost? This is what we want to know. And if this is the cost, then how can we remedy this cost or making sure to minimize the cost to give this to our broadcasters? This is what we want to know. So I think the only way to speed up the negotiation is to settle all of this uneasiness. And the other way I would like to conclude is that there is no politicizing of the process. This is a natural force in any negotiation of a treaty, because negotiating a treaty is a public policy exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erry, for reminding us that negotiating a treaty is a public policy exercise. And I also noted your use of the word uneasiness, which I hadn't heard before in this two-day seminar.